In a forgotten corner of the country, where the roads don't show up on any map, there's a rundown, rust-bitten motel with flickering neon lights and a front desk clerk who never blinks. Travelers stop for the night, desperate for rest, but none of them leave the same. Some vanish, others lose their minds. A few are found whispering to walls, unable to sleep, their eyes peeled open as if held by invisible fingers, because each room in this motel dreams the same dream. A nightmare so real it breathes. A nightmare that doesn't stop when you wake up. Each generation of visitors brings a new story, a fresh scream, a different way to die. 7 generations, 7 unforgettable encounters with a force that cannot be named, understood, or escaped. Welcome to Whispering Pines Motel, where you don't check out. You're checked in by something older than time and far less forgiving. If you were stranded with no choice but to spend one night in this motel, which room would you choose? Room 1 with the blood-stained mirror, or Room 7 with the door that locks from the outside? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you're brave enough to follow each generation's nightmare. Comment below what you think causes all the rooms to share the same dream, or if maybe, just maybe, it isn't a dream at all. The rain fell in thick sheets as Caleb Mercer thumbed a ride along Highway 60. Soaked to the bone and miles from anywhere familiar. He'd been hitchhiking west trying to escape a life of debts and broken promises in Indiana. As night clawed down the sky, headlights emerged behind him. An old Dodge Charger, rust-framed and humming low like a growl. The driver didn't speak, didn't even nod, just slowed, unlocked the passenger door and waited. Caleb climbed in, muttering thanks, trying not to stare at the man's face if that even was a man. The driver's skin looked waxy, too pale. His eyes didn't blink. "Where you headed?" Caleb asked. Silent. Then the driver's mouth cracked open. But instead of words, a slow wheeze came out like air escaping an old balloon. 30 minutes later, the Charger came to a sudden halt outside a roadside building half-eaten by vines and darkness. Neon lights buzzed overhead, Whispering Pines Motel, spelled out in fading red. Caleb looked around, but the car was already gone. Taillights swallowed by the storm. He approached the lobby. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of mildew, and something faintly metallic. The clerk behind the cracked plexiglass was a woman, maybe. She wore a faded floral dress, and her face was expressionless, like someone who had forgotten how to pretend to be human. "One night," Caleb muttered. "Room's fine. Just for tonight." She handed him a rusted key labeled Room. No smile, no instructions. Inside, the room was musty but tolerable. Cigarette burns dotted the carpet. The lamp buzzed like it was alive, and the wallpaper peeled like scabbed skin. Caleb dropped his bag and collapsed on the mattress. That's when he saw it. In the corner of the room where shadows pooled thickest, a figure crouched, arms long, back arched, and face hidden beneath oily black hair. It wasn't there a second ago. He blinked, gone. He checked the closet, empty. Under the bed, dust and wire hangers. Maybe his mind was playing tricks. He hadn't eaten all day, hadn't slept in 2. He turned off the lamp and let darkness swallow him. Then the nightmare began. He was in the motel again, but it wasn't quite the same. The walls pulsed like muscle tissue. The carpet oozed dark fluid with every step. Caleb wandered the halls, which stretched and twisted like intestines. Behind every door he heard screaming. Familiar screams, screams that sounded like his own. He opened Room 3's door and saw himself, back arched, arms too long, crouched in the corner. His own face twisted in agony, eyes bleeding black tears. The room caught fire, not with flames, but with a cold heat that froze the marrow. Then he woke up, soaked in sweat, the walls intact, the shadow gone. But the nightmare had left something behind. Scratched into the inside of the bathroom mirror were 5 words, not there before. "You are not alone here." He packed up to leave, but the door wouldn't open. Not jammed, locked from the outside. "Hey!" he screamed. "Hey!" Silence. Then footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, scraping. He peeked through the peephole. No one. He turned. The figure from the dream now stood beside the bed, tall and malformed, its head twitching like a dying fly. Caleb staggered back, grabbed the lamp, Through it, the figure vanished, not like a ghost, more like something melting through the floorboards. His phone had no signal, no bars. He tried calling emergency, only static. When he checked the window, the world outside was wrong. The sky pulsed red. The trees bled. The parking lot was filled with faceless people standing in rows, facing the motel, unmoving, waiting, panicking. Caleb smashed the window and climbed out. He ran across the parking lot, weaving through the faceless figures. None moved. He passed room 1, then room 2, all the doors wide open, all the rooms identical to his own. Except every bed was occupied by him, his corpse, repeating, gutted, burned, hanging, eyes gouged. He screamed. "Caleb," whispered a voice. He turned. The motel clerk stood by the front door, eyes glowing faintly red, her face cracked like dry mud, mouth opening wider than should be humanly possible. "You left something in your room." He turned to run, but the ground gave way beneath him, swallowing him whole. Caleb awoke in his bed. The room was back to normal. The storm had passed. Sunlight peeked through broken blinds. Had it all been a dream? He got up and walked to the mirror. His reflection stared back, until it didn't. It began smiling. He wasn't. Then the reflection whispered, "You never woke up." Blood began to seep from the edges of the glass. The walls breathed, and room 3 began to hum. They didn't mean to kill him. Gina Hart's hand still shook as she drove through the wet night, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Beside her, Trevor slid lower in the passenger seat, hoodie up, face pale. The gun sat heavy in the glove box between them, wrapped in a t-shirt soaked in blood. "We had no choice," Trevor muttered for the 20th time. "He grabbed you. I didn't even think." "Shut up," Gina whispered, eyes scanning the endless road ahead. The headlights caught nothing but blacktop and creeping fog. They ditched the body in a ravine, 30 miles back, wiped the prints, burned the IDs, but that didn't wash away the guilt, or the sound of the man's breath bubbling through a punctured lung. An hour passed. No sign of civilization. Then the fog parted, revealing a crooked neon sign blinking red. Whispering Pines Motel. They looked at each other. "We can't keep driving," Gina said. "Let's just get a room, clean up, sleep." Trevor nodded, eyes hollow. Inside the lobby, the clerk stared at them like she'd been expecting them. Same pale skin, unmoving features, and those horrible slow blinks. She didn't ask for names. She didn't ask for payment. She handed them a rusted key marked Room 6. The hallway smelled like mildew and copper. Room 6 opened with a groan. Dust hung thick in the air. The furniture looked warped, like it had spent years underwater. The walls bore faint handprints, some small like a child's, others inhumanly large. But the bed was made, and they were exhausted. Trevor hit the shower first. Gina checked the windows. No locks. When she pulled the curtains aside, she saw nothing but endless trees swaying in dead silence. No road, no stars, no moon, only trees. As if the motel had been swallowed by some new dimension while they slept. She tried to shake it off. In the bathroom, steam fogged the mirror. Trevor was inside, humming. The same melody on repeat. Gina paused. He wasn't the humming type. "Hey, you okay in there?" The humming stopped. A long pause. Then a knock from inside the mirror. She stepped back. "Trevor?" The bathroom door opened. He stepped out, soaked, towel around his waist. "Yeah? You were humming." Then, something knocked. "I didn't hum." He looked dead serious. That night, neither of them slept. The room was too loud. Not with sound, but with presence. Like the walls were watching, breathing, waiting. Sometime after 2 a.m., the nightmare began. Gina opened her eyes and found herself in room 6. But the walls were bleeding. The floorboards writhed like snakes. Trevor floated midair, mouth stretched open, trying to scream but gagged by a web of shadow. From the corner emerged a figure, not walking, crawling. It dragged its face along the ground, skinless, eyeless, with a grin that never ended. It moved without sound, but its breathing came from every wall at once. She screamed, but there was no voice. The figure pressed a finger to its lipless mouth, as if to say, "Shh." Trevor jerked awake back in bed. the room normal again. But Gina was missing. He searched the bathroom, the hallway, nothing. Then he heard her, sobbing. Inside the closet, he opened it empty, sobbing again, this time from under the bed. He knelt. There under the bed, staring back at him, was Gina's face. But it wasn't her. It blinked sideways, smiled upside down. Blood leaked from her eyes. "Trevor," it whispered. "You left me." He scrambled back. Behind him, the real Gina stood, pale and shaking. "I saw you floating," she said. "I couldn't move. Something held me down." They bolted for the door. Locked. Trevor turned the knob so hard it broke off. The lights flickered. Then every bulb in the room exploded at once, showering the floor in sparks and glass. A voice filled the room. Not human, not even earthly. It said just 3 words. They never leave. They shoved furniture through the window and climbed out into the dark. But outside was no better. The motel stretched infinitely now. Rooms upon rooms, doors upon doors, and from every door someone screamed, some human, some not. A boy in pajamas ran past them, mouth sewn shut. A woman followed, floating inches above the ground, her stomach slashed open, and eyes wide with joy. Trevor turned and saw their car right where they left it. They ran for it, jumped in, keys still in the ignition. He turned it. The engine roared, then died. He looked up. In the rearview mirror, room 6, stared back at them. Not the building, the actual room, floating, its door open, and within the shadows, something waited. A long finger reached out of the mirror, scraped the back seat. Closer. Gina screamed. Trevor reached for the glove box. The gun was gone. The rearview mirror shattered. Trevor hit the gas. The car moved an inch, then stopped. Chains, dozens of them, wrapped around the tires, the doors, the frame, dragging the car back toward the motel. Metal shrieked as they were pulled in reverse, faster, faster, until they were parked outside. Room 6 again. Only this time, the room was different. No walls, no ceiling, just darkness. And voices, whispers, dozens, hundreds, all saying the same word. Confess. The door opened by itself. Gina grabbed Trevor's hand. "We're not going in." But Trevor's feet moved anyway. He turned to her, eyes wide, voice flat. "I think I already did." She tried to hold him back, but her hand passed through him like mist. His body stepped inside. The door slammed shut. She screamed. Outside, the neon sign flickered, and the night remained silent. The storm came without warning. Jerry Forrester had been on the road for hours, watching the black clouds form as the highway blurred beneath his tires. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was anymore. But he was tired. Tired of the same old routine. Tired of the endless drive. The years of solitude piled up around him like dust on an old shelf. The road had become his home, his only companion, his only purpose. And then, the storm hit. Lightning cracked across the sky, splitting the world in half, for a moment. And the rain fell in sheets so thick it was impossible to see past the windshield. He couldn't make out a single sign, a single landmark. All he knew was the road, wet, slick, and twisting as though it were alive, pulling him somewhere he didn't want to go. He squinted through the downpour, and there it was, a small, fading neon light up ahead. A motel. Whispering Pines Motel. Jerry wasn't much for staying in motels, never had been. But the rain was coming down so hard now that he couldn't see past the front of his truck. He pulled in, tires skidding across the gravel lot, and parked under a flickering light by the office. The door swung open before he could even step out of the truck. An old woman stood behind the desk. She had white hair pulled back into a tight bun, and her eyes were sunken, as though she hadn't blinked in decades. "Room?" she asked, her voice hoarse and brittle, like a dead leaf scraping against a stone. "Just for the night," Jerry muttered, his eyes scanning the dark interior behind her. The smell of mildew hit him immediately, old, damp air that clung to his clothes like a second skin. The woman handed him a key, no words, no smile, just the key to room. Jerry grabbed the key and muttered thanks. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, but he was too tired to care. The room was as expected, bare, worn furniture, a faint smell of something rotten in the corner. The bed had seen better days, but it would. He kicked off his boots and lay down staring at the ceiling, the hum of the old fan above barely making a dent in the oppressive silence. It wasn't long before the nightmare began. He wasn't sure if he'd fallen asleep, or if the world around him just shifted. But suddenly the room felt wrong. The air was colder now, unnaturally so. He could see his breath as it condensed in front of him, a pale cloud of mist, rising with each exhale. The walls, which had once seemed solid, now rippled like the surface of a pond disturbed by an unseen hand. The bed trembled beneath him, the sheets twisting like they had a life of their own, and the door, he had locked it, hadn't he, was now wide open, creaking slowly, letting in nothing but the darkness. Jeremiah sat up, heart pounding in his chest. His hands trembled as he reached for the lamp on the nightstand, flicking the switch. The light didn't come on. The room remained consumed by shadow. Then, there was the sound, a faint scraping, like something dragging itself across the floor. Jerry stood, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He wasn't alone in the room. That much was clear now. His footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence. As he crossed the room, moving toward the open door, the scraping grew louder. He reached for the knob, turned it, and pulled. The hallway outside was different. It stretched farther than it should have, twisting and bending like an impossible maze. The carpet underfoot was dark, almost wet. Jerry took a step forward. Then he saw it, a figure at the far end of the hallway standing in front of a door. It was hunched over, its face hidden beneath a thick mass of white hair, the rest of its body bent at unnatural angles. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but Jerry could feel it staring at him, watching. He backed away slowly, heart hammering. His hand fumbled for the door, but before he could shut it, he heard the voice. "Help me." The words came from the figure. He froze. He had to be hearing things. No one could speak like that. No one could ask for help in such a dead voice. He turned to run, but when he looked down the hallway again, the figure was much closer now, so close that its breath brushed against the back of his neck. He spun around and sprinted back to the room, slamming the door behind him. His hands shook as he locked it. Then, the door handle began to rattle. A whisper in the dark, barely audible. "Let me in." He stumbled backward, his body crashing into the wall. The scraping sound was louder now, and there was something else, something wet, a slow drip, drip. He turned toward the bathroom, his mind screaming at him to stay away, but his feet moved anyway. Inside, the mirror was cracked, jagged lines running across its surface. In the reflection, Jerry saw the figure again. Only this time, it was inside the room with him, standing right behind him, staring at him, with those hollow, lifeless eyes. He spun around. Nothing. But when he looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there. It had moved close, so close in fact, that its mouth was now pressed against the glass. "Help me." The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a scream, one filled with agony, a scream that seemed to tear through the very air itself. Jerry's mind snapped. Without thinking, he grabbed the old, rusted lamp from the nightstand and hurled it at the mirror. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, but the figure didn't disappear. Instead, it crawled out of the shards, its body twisted, bones cracking and reforming, as it pulled itself from the mirror. Its mouth stretched wider than should have been possible, exposing teeth jagged and sharp, like broken glass. Jerry turned and ran. He didn't know where he was going, just away from the thing that was crawling after him, its broken limbs snapping and cracking, as it moved faster, gaining on him. He reached the door, locked. The hallway outside was silent now. He turned back. The figure stood in the doorway, its body now fully formed, fleshless, skin stretched taut over bones, and it smiled. "Help me." The darkness swallowed him whole. Kara Sullivan was a woman, on a mission. At least she used to be. She had been driving for hours, not sure where she was headed anymore. The road had become a blur, the sky dark and stormy, the landscape stretching out in endless monotony. It was supposed to be a short trip. She'd been on her way to visit her sister in the next state, but somewhere between the rain and the unyielding darkness, she had gotten off track, lost. Now her phone had no signal, and the gaslight on her dashboard blinked an angry red. Just as her panic began to set in, she saw it, another motel up ahead. Whispering Pines Motel. At least she thought. It would give her a chance to rest and figure out where she had gone wrong. She pulled into the parking lot, the tires crunching over wet gravel, and stepped out of the car, her shoes sinking into the mud. The air was thick, damp, almost suffocating. There were no other cars in sight, and the building loomed like a dark, foreboding shadow, its neon sign buzzing weakly, casting an eerie red glow across the parking lot. Kara hesitated for a moment before walking toward the front door. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and she was met with a smell, a sour, decaying odor that made her stomach turn. The clerk behind the counter was an older man, his face gaunt, his eyes empty. He didn't speak as she approached. He just handed her a key to room 4. She didn't question it. Tired, irritated, and far from feeling any sense of comfort, she grabbed the key and made her way to the room. Room 4 was cold. Cold in a way that went beyond just a lack of heat. It felt dead. Kara walked around the room, inspecting every corner, every worn piece of furniture. But there was something unsettling about it. The bed, perfectly made, stood in the middle of the room, but something about it seemed off, as if the air around it vibrated with a strange energy, an unseen weight. She dismissed the feeling and took a quick shower, hoping the hot water would wash away the exhaustion from her bones. Afterward, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, trying to focus on her reflection, to center herself in the emptiness of the motel room. But there was something about the mirror, something that didn't belong. She blinked, and for a second, she swore she saw a face appear behind her. Just for a split second, a twisted, gaunt face, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched into an impossible grin. It vanished when she turned, but the image burned itself into her mind. Her pulse quickened. Trying to calm herself, Kara finished brushing her hair and wiped the condensation from the mirror. And that's when she saw it. The door behind her was open. She hadn't opened it. She stared at the door, heart hammering in her chest. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, as if the walls were pressing in. Kara's hands trembled as she crossed the room toward the door. She thought she could hear something, a low, dragging sound from the hallway outside. The moment she opened the door, the temperature plummeted. A cold wind rushed in, biting at her skin. A voice whispered from the hallway, "You can't leave." Kara froze. Her breath caught in her throat, but the words had already been spoken. She didn't want to look, but her body moved against her will, her feet dragging her out of the room. She passed through the hallway, her heart pounding louder with each step. The light above her flickered with a faint buzzing sound. The air around her seemed to hum, vibrating as if the building itself were alive, alive and waiting. Ahead of her was the source of the sound, the same dragging noise, scraping along the floor. The closer she got, the more she could hear the faint wetness of it, the slapping of something heavy being dragged across the floor. And then she saw it, a shadow, tall and twisted, creeping toward her. It was impossible to make out its features, but she could tell it was no human. The shape loomed, larger than it should have been, its body contorting and shifting unnaturally, like something trying to escape from the very walls of the motel. Her legs froze. She couldn't move. The thing was dragging itself toward her. Its mouth opened, wide, too wide, revealing jagged teeth, a grin that was not only terrifying, but hungry. It dragged one arm forward, nails scraping on the ground. But as it moved closer, Kara realized what it was dragging. A body. Her body. She gasped, taking a step back. The face of the body wasn't hers, but it was unmistakably familiar. It was a face she'd seen in the mirror earlier. The same hollow eyes, the same impossible grin stretched wide, and the same empty void that filled its stare. The creature whispered again, but this time the voice was louder. "You should have left. Now you're one of us." Panic flooded Kara's veins. She turned and ran back toward the room, slamming the door behind her. But it was too late. The walls of the motel were changing, shrinking, twisting. The hallway behind her was no longer where it had been. It was now a maze of shifting doors, closing and opening on their own. Walls bending in unnatural angles. The very structure of the motel seemed to be alive, its innards expanding and contracting like a beast in pain. Kara ran back to the bed, her mind racing. desperate for an escape. She could feel something following her, dragging itself closer with every step, every breath she took. A soft knock at the door. She screamed. No, she shouted, pulling the blankets over her head, her hands shaking violently. The knock came again, but this time it wasn't from the door. It was from the mirror. Her reflection grinned at her. Not the same reflection she had seen earlier. No, this time it was different. The reflection was twisted, its smile wide and malicious. The eyes hollowed out like empty sockets. "Let me in," it whispered, voice slick and slippery, crawling under her skin. Kara's breath came in ragged gasps. As the reflection in the mirror reached toward her, she screamed, pushing herself away from the mirror. But it felt like her body wasn't listening. She could see the darkness creeping over the edges of her vision. The figure in the mirror was coming out, pulling itself through the glass, reaching with long, clawed hands. Before she could stop herself, she slammed her fist against the glass. It shattered, and then she felt nothing. Tom Barnes had never believed in ghosts. In his line of work, skepticism was a necessity. He'd spent years investigating strange occurrences, but he always found logical explanations: faulty wiring, sleep deprivation, tricked minds, ghosts, monsters, supernatural entities. They were all stories, nothing more than the fever dreams of those desperate to explain the unexplainable. That was until he found himself at Whispering Pines Motel. Tom had been driving for hours, following a lead from a strange case involving missing persons in the area. He'd arrived hoping to find something, anything that might explain the disappearances. But instead, he found himself stuck on a rain-slicked road with no signal and nowhere else to turn. And then, like a beacon in the dark, the flickering neon sign of the motel had appeared. Whispering Pines Motel. He wasn't in a hurry anymore. If there was anything he'd learned from his years of investigation, it was that you never rushed into anything. So he parked the car, grabbed his jacket, and made his way inside. The moment he stepped into the lobby, something felt off. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and old leather. The clerk behind the desk was an elderly man, hunched over, his face shadowed by a crooked cap. He barely acknowledged Tom's presence, just handed him the key to room 6 with a wordless grunt. Tom looked at the key, but before he could ask anything, the clerk was already turning away, muttering something under his breath. Something about the last one, though. Tom couldn't catch it. It sounded like a warning. Rooms. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just coincidence, that it was the same room number mentioned in several of the disappearances. The hallway was silent, dark. His footsteps echoed as he walked toward the room, the air growing colder the closer he got. When he reached the door, it creaked open as if it had been waiting for him. The room was small, worn, but not unusual, until he saw the mirror. Tom paused as he entered. The mirror on the wall was cracked, shards splintering through the glass like spider webs. The reflection of the room was distorted, the colors blending together in strange patterns. The flickering light above gave everything an eerie, almost unreal quality. He couldn't help but reach toward it, his fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the mirror. That's when the nightmare began. He blinked and suddenly the room shifted. The walls stretched outward, the floor dropped, and the bed twisted into impossible angles. The mirror warped, and in the reflection, he saw someone standing behind him. A woman, her face gaunt and pale, her eyes wide and empty. She smiled at him, but it wasn't a smile of comfort. It was one of hunger, of desperation. Tom turned quickly, his pulse quickening, but the room was empty. The woman wasn't there. He rubbed his eyes, unsure if he had just imagined it. But when he looked back at the mirror, her face was still there, staring at him with those hollow eyes. Her lips moved, but no sound came. He felt a chill run through his spine. Something was terribly wrong with this place. He could feel it. They were here, whatever they were. Without thinking, he turned to leave the room, but the door slammed shut before he could reach it. He yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. And then the whispers started. They were faint at first, barely audible, but they grew louder with each passing second. They came from all around him, from inside his own mind. Voices calling out to him, beckoning him to listen. You shouldn't have come. You can't leave. It's too late for you. They're coming for you now." Tom spun around, his breath shallow, his heart hammering against his chest. The room was alive now. The walls bent and shifted. The floor buckled beneath his feet as if the entire building had become some monstrous living thing, breathing, shifting, pulsating with unnatural energy. Suddenly a figure emerged from the corner of the room. It wasn't human. It was too tall, its limbs too long, its skin stretched thin like parchment. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, and it let out a sound, something between a scream and a growl that rattled the very air. Tom backed away, his mind racing. The thing's eyes locked onto him, dark and hollow, filled with an insatiable hunger. He knew that if it reached him, there would be no escape. It was the same thing he had seen in the case files, the same creature that had claimed so many lives. It was here, and now it was coming for him. He turned and bolted for the window, but it was too late. The mirror shattered in an explosion of glass, and from the shards, more figures began to emerge. They were all around him now, twisted, malformed creatures, their mouths open in grotesque expressions of agony and desire. "Help me! Help me!" Their voices intertwined with the whispers, creating a maddening chorus. Tom could feel his sanity slipping, his grip on reality weakening. He slammed his fists against the window, but it wouldn't break. And then, in the reflection of the shattered glass, he saw room 6. Only it wasn't his reflection anymore. It was the room before the chaos, before the nightmare. It was the room where the last person had stayed, the last victim. And there, in the reflection, stood a man with hollow eyes, his skin pale and stretched tight against his bones. He was staring back at Tom, his expression blank, empty, and hopeless. "It's your turn now," the man whispered, his lips barely moving. Tom's mind screamed in terror. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The air grew thick, heavy, and the walls closed in on him. The whispers turned to screams. He couldn't escape. Not anymore. Eva Daniels had heard the rumors. The stories about the Whispering Pines Motel had floated around town for as long as she could remember. Whispers of strange happenings, missing persons, and the unnerving sense that time itself twisted and warped within its walls. But Eva wasn't one for superstition. A practical woman with a sharp mind, she didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. She believed in facts, in science, in logic. Still, the motel had always intrigued her. And tonight, with the storm battering the windows of her car, and no other place to shelter, she found herself in front of the very place she had always avoided. The neon sign flickered as she pulled into the parking lot. She glanced at the rearview mirror and saw nothing but darkness stretching behind her, endless and suffocating. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the oppressive night air. The rain dripped steadily from the roof, a constant rhythmic sound that only heightened her sense of isolation. Inside, the air was musty, like a place untouched for years. The old woman behind the counter didn't seem to notice her at first. She was hunched over, her face obscured by shadow. Only when Eva cleared her throat did the woman look up. Her eyes were pale, almost clouded, and she spoke in a voice that sent a chill down Eva's spine. "Room?" the woman rasped. Eva hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll take whatever you have." The woman didn't speak again, but handed her a key. Room 7. No words of welcome, no smile, just a key. Eva took it, feeling the weight of it in her palm. The moment her fingers brushed the cold metal, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, just slightly, but enough to make her shiver. She had a feeling that she was walking into something that wasn't quite right. Room 7 was just as she expected. Small, worn down, with threadbare carpet and peeling wallpaper. A single bed in the center of the room, an old dresser pushed against one wall, and a small desk by the window. The rain pounded against the window pane, a constant reminder of the storm outside. But it wasn't the storm that unsettled Eva. It was the strange silence that filled the room, a silence that pressed down on her chest and made every breath feel heavier than the last. She unpacked quickly, tossing her bag on the bed, and tried to focus on something, anything to distract herself from the creeping sense of unease. She opened the window just a crack, letting in the fresh, damp air. But even as she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The moment she shut the window, it happened. The floor creaked, not the usual kind of creak, but a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to reverberate through the walls. She froze. For a second, she thought it was the building settling, the house groaning under the pressure of the storm. But then, a soft sound, almost like a whisper. She turned, her heart pounding. A shadow darted across the corner of her vision. "Hello," she called out, her voice sounding far too small in the empty room. There was no response, but that's when she saw it on the far side of the room, next to the mirror. A face. It was a woman's face. Pale, gaunt, eyes wide and unblinking. The woman was standing perfectly still, staring at Eva with that eerie, hollow gaze. Eva's heart raced. Her mouth went dry. She blinked, but the face didn't disappear. It remained there, staring, watching. The woman's lips slowly curled upward into a grin, a twisted, impossibly wide smile. "No," Eva whispered, taking a step back. The face in the mirror moved. It tilted its head to the side, and its lips parted, letting out a soft sound, a laugh, a low, raspy laugh that reverberated through the room, sending shivers down Eva's spine. And then the laughter stopped. The woman in the mirror reached out, her hand pressing against the glass. Her fingers left trails of black streaks behind them, as though the mirror were made of something far more sinister than reflective glass. Eva stumbled backward, her hand gripping the edge of the dresser for support. Before she could react, the door slammed shut. The room went pitch black. A sharp, staccato knock echoed through the darkness. It was coming from the mirror. Eva's breath caught in her throat as the whispers began. They started faint, distant, but soon grew loud. Each word was clearer than the last, and each word carried an unbearable weight of dread. "You're one of us now. You can't leave. Help me." Eva turned toward the door, but it was no use. She couldn't leave. The door wouldn't budge. She rushed to the window, but it was sealed shut, the glass cold and unyielding. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. The woman's face in the mirror twisted, her features distorting, her mouth widening impossibly. Her eyes, those empty eyes, seemed to draw closer to Eva, reaching out to her through the glass. Eva backed away, unable to tear her gaze away from the mirror, her body moving on instinct. Now, her mind racing, something behind her stirred. The bed, which had been perfectly still, began to shift. The sheets twisted and writhed like something was beneath them, struggling to break free. Eva watched in horror as the bed seemed to grow larger, the mattress bulging and writhing as if something beneath it was alive. "Help me!" The whispers grew louder, now joined by other voices, voices of men and women, all calling out for help, all lost, all trapped within this place. Eva's mind spun. The room was collapsing around her, warping, bending. She could see it now. The figures, there were so many of them, hunched figures, crawling toward her from all corners of the room. Their eyes were empty, their smiles were too wide, and they were reaching for her. Eva turned and ran, her hands trembling as she yanked on the door handle. The door swung open, but it wasn't the hallway she expected to see. No, it was a vast black void stretching out before her, a void that seemed to swallow all light, all sound, all hope. The whispers echoed, now a chorus of voices. "You'll stay with us forever." And in that moment, Eva realized what she had known all along. There was no escaping the Whispering Pines Motel. Not for her, not for anyone, not even for the last guest. The storm outside howled as Kyle Williams pulled his battered car into the parking lot of Whispering Pines Motel. He had no choice. He had been driving for hours, and the relentless rain had turned the roads slick and treacherous. He had hoped to make it to the next town before dark, but that plan had long since been abandoned. The neon sign flickered weakly as he parked next to an old sedan. The headlights of his car reflected off the wet asphalt, creating strange, distorted patterns on the ground. Kyle didn't particularly like the look of the place, but it was the only option available. The longer he sat there, the more uneasy he felt, like the motel itself was watching him, waiting. The lobby was empty when he entered. No one was behind the counter, and the air was thick with a musty scent. Kyle glanced around, his eyes scanning the dim room. There was an odd heaviness in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, adding to the strange atmosphere. After a moment, an old man appeared from behind the counter. His face was gaunt, his eyes dark and tired, as though he hadn't slept in years. He gave Kyle a look that felt like it pierced right through him, as if the man could see his every thought, his every fear. "Room?" the man asked, his voice rasping like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. Kyle nodded, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Yes, please, just for the night." The old man handed him a key without a word. The key had no label, no room number written on it, just an old tarnished metal key that seemed out of place in the modern world. Room 9. Kyle's stomach turned slightly as he took it from the man. The weight of the key felt wrong, heavier than it should have been. The man's eyes followed him as he turned to leave, and the strange, oppressive silence of the place weighed heavily on his shoulders. Room 9 was at the far end of the motel, away from the other. The building was old, the hallways narrow and dimly lit, and as Kyle walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoed unnervingly loudly, as though the walls themselves were listening. When he reached the door to room 9, he hesitated. There was a soft, distant noise, almost like a low hum, that seemed to come from behind the door. It wasn't a sound he could quite identify, but it felt wrong. He turned the handle, and the door creaked open. The room was dark, only a single light bulb hanging overhead, casting an eerie glow over the small, sparse space. The bed, the dresser, and the desk were all exactly what he'd expected, old, worn and tired. But there was something about the room that made him uneasy, something unsettling. It wasn't until he stepped fully inside that he saw the mirror. The mirror was large, placed above the dresser, its frame ornate, though tarnished with age. But that wasn't what caught Kyle's attention. No, it was the reflection in the mirror. For a moment, he stood frozen. He could have sworn the room looked different in the mirror. The furniture appeared older, the colors faded, the walls were cracked, peeling, as if the room was decaying, rotting away. And the reflection wasn't quite right either. A shadow seemed to loom in the corner of the room, something that shouldn't have been there. Kyle shook his head, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in his chest. He had been driving for hours, and exhaustion was clouding his mind. He wasn't thinking straight. With a heavy sigh, he tossed his bag onto the bed and collapsed onto it, closing his eyes for a moment. The soft hum of the room persisted in the background, a constant drone that made him feel as though he was drifting in and out of a dream. But the moment his eyes fluttered open again, something had changed. The room was different. The shadows had grown darker, stretching unnaturally along the walls. The bed beneath him felt colder, as if the air around him had dropped several degrees. The hum had intensified, vibrating through the very floor beneath him. And then, the whispers began. They were soft at first, almost imperceptible. But as the seconds passed, they grew louder, more urgent. Kyle sat up, his heart racing as the whispers became clear. "Leave. You can't stay here. They're coming for you." A sudden banging noise came from the door. Kyle's heart jumped in his chest. He stood, trembling, his eyes darting toward the door. It was locked. It had been locked when he came in. Another bang, loud, a rattle of the handle. Then the whispering stopped. Kyle's breath caught in his throat as he heard the unmistakable sound of someone, scratching at the walls, dragging something heavy across the floor. He turned, but the room was empty. The shadows in the corners of the room had begun to twitch, as if alive, squirming, stretching to reach him. He backed away, his chest tightening as panic began to claw at him. The mirror. He had to look at the mirror again. The reflection had changed once more. This time the room was no longer decaying, no longer decayed. It was pristine, untouched, but something was wrong. The reflection showed a figure standing in the doorway behind him, a tall, gaunt silhouette that looked too still. The figure moved. Slowly it approached him. The figure reached toward him, and Kyle realized, with a terrible jolt of horror, that it was not just a reflection. It was in the room. The figure was right behind him, its cold breath brushing his neck. Kyle whirled around, but there was nothing there. Nothing except the growing sound of the scratching, The dragging, the whispering, it was everywhere now, surrounding him, suffocating him. You should have left. The words came from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were the words of every guest who had stayed here, the voices of those who had vanished, those who were lost. They had been waiting for him. The walls creaked, the floor groaned, the door burst open. A flood of figures poured into the room, shadowed, distorted, twisted. They moved like something other, something that shouldn't exist. They swarmed toward him, their mouths open in grotesque, silent screams. And in the reflection, he saw the truth. Kyle wasn't standing in room 9. He was standing in the same room as every other lost soul who had entered the Whispering Pines Motel. He was trapped, and the room was never meant to let anyone leave. The nightmare has ended. What did you think of the story? Do you believe that some places hold on to the souls of the lost? Would you ever stay at a place like Whispering Pines Motel? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more haunting stories like this one.